Hello and welcome to Tech Deals. In 2018, I did a series of videos on this computer right here, a $400 budget build guide featuring this CPU, Ryzen 3 2200G for just $99. What a deal. 4 cores, 4 threads, Zen 1. It is now 2022. I have been using this machine ever since. Its configuration has changed a number of times. I'll talk about that a little bit in this video and some of the benefits and advantages of AMD. There certainly are many. And I will talk about the machine that I compared this to back in 2018 and why I no longer have that computer because, yeah, we'll get to that. I will also talk about what you can do today in 2022 to build the modern equivalent of this. Hint. Maybe wait for Zen 4 APUs with RDNA 2 graphics because the Ryzen 5 5600G with Vega 7 graphics, yes, really, Vega 7 leaves a lot to be desired, but we'll get to that in just a minute.
Today's video is brought to you by URCD Keys, the best source for Windows 10 and Office Professional product keys at deeply discounted prices, and we have got further discounts on those at the end of this video.
Before we get into what I've done with this computer, what I'm going to do with it, and all the benefits of Ryzen, let's do a really quick recap for those of you who either didn't see the original video back in 2018 or perhaps you've slept since then, which is completely understandable. This was a $400 build, and I did itemize the prices in the build video back then, talked about it. It really came out to $400, $99 for the CPU. AMD doesn't really make $99 APUs anymore, but they also don't make the Ryzen 3 chips anymore, except for OEM builds. There is a Ryzen 3 5300G for OEM customers only, but the least expensive they sell today is the Ryzen 5 5600G. The motherboard was a really good deal back then. This B350 MSI motherboard was just $65, and it has proved to be trouble-free. I wish it had more features, but it was $65, so it is what it is. This case is interesting. It doesn't have great airflow, it doesn't have great features, but it was $37 at the time. It is very difficult to find a $37 case, and other than just not having great airflow, it certainly has done the job. The RAM is perhaps one of the most interesting conversations to be had. I was kind of surprised. I'd forgotten how much RAM prices had changed since 2018. This computer was configured with just 8 gigabytes of RAM. Can you imagine me recommending a system in 2022 with just 8 gigabytes of RAM? Heaven forbid. 8 gigabytes of RAM in March of 2018 was $103. That was the least expensive price at the time. I know, crazy. You can buy 32 gigabytes of RAM in 2022 for less, about $80 or $85, than 8 gigabytes cost just 4 years ago. So whenever you think computer prices are only going up, everything's just expensive now, it's crazy. Well, some items are, but the RAM has definitely gotten less expensive, so that is pretty nice. In fact, you can buy 16 gigabytes of RAM for less than $50 now, which makes the old price look very expensive. This was built with a 256 gigabyte SATA SSD for $65. It was slow, it was DRAM-less, it really wasn't very good. In fact, it was so questionable that during the build itself, I actually swapped it out for a 480 gigabyte drive simply because I wanted to do benchmarks and testing with it. It made sense for my purposes. You could have used 256 back then, but even in 2018, that was pretty limiting. Frankly, 480 gigabytes in 2022 is pretty limiting. Here's the cool part. $65 bought you a 256 gig SATA drive back then. Less than $60 today will buy you a 1 terabyte NVMe SSD. Not super premium, mind you, but miles better than what was sold back then. So 4 times the space for less money. That is the deal. Last but certainly not least is the power supply. This was built with a $30 power supply. 500 watts, nothing overly special, but certainly absolutely all this computer ever needed. And it's actually had several video cards in there since. Again, I'll talk about that in just a minute. But 500 watts for $30, that's gotten a little bit better today, depending upon your point of view. $35 will buy you a 600 watt power supply. A rather nice EVGA unit with all black cables, which is pretty cool. No, it's not 80 plus gold or 80 plus platinum, but 80 plus for $35, that's not bad. What I don't have for you today is new fresh benchmarks. There are a million benchmarks of the Ryzen 3 2200G on the web, including our own channel. Linked in the video description below will be the playlist on this. Not only did I do a parts overview back then, and if you want to see some old school tech deals, please consider giving that a watch. I did a full build video with the camera overhead showing the filming of this, and frankly, the how-to guide process of building a computer hasn't really changed. Change the CPU for something modern, change the motherboard for a B550, the actual assembly is the same. And then there were a bunch of benchmarks. I tested a variety of games. Each game got its own video, which does produce a lot of published videos, but it does have the benefit that you can just watch the ones you're interested in. If you want to check out some performance on this, please consider checking the playlist out in the video description below. With the parts overview refresher out of the way, I want to talk for a minute about what we've done with this machine in the past 4 years. This is not something that I see a lot of tech YouTube channels do. There might be a reason for that. We'll see whether you guys like this video or not. But they don't take a machine they built 4 years ago and then talk about its history, its upgrades, what they've used it for, and then what you could use it for in the future. Maybe in an upgrade guide. And we'll talk a little bit about what you could do with this machine today to extend its life and whether it's worth doing so or should you build something new. But for the moment, let's talk about the last 4 years. Shortly after building this computer and benchmarking the Ryzen 3 2200G, I very quickly switched the CPU out for the Ryzen 5 2400G because the 3400G sitting right here didn't exist at the time, although it came out shortly thereafter. I put in the Ryzen 5 2400G, and there are benchmarks of the 2400G. At the time, it was $50 more. It was 4 cores and 8 threads, whereas this was 4 cores and 4 threads, and the Vega integrated graphics were better. This had Vega 8, that had Vega 11, and if you had the $50, I thought it was definitely worth the investment, but if you're trying to keep to a budget, that can be a challenge. After putting the 2400G in, I used it briefly for a few things, and then I basically put the machine aside and thought, I'll come back to it and do something with it in the future. Fast forward about a year, we moved into our new office, and I needed a computer near the front door that I was going to use for emails and printing shipping labels and just basically using for office-related tasks. Perfect machine for that. This got put near the front door to our new office so that when we receive stuff and check things in, we get shipments either from Amazon or Newegg or from AMD or Intel or one of the companies that sends us samples. I could check those in when we had to ship things out, either ship them back to the companies. We do get to keep some of our samples. We do have to return some of them. It varies from item to item and company to company. Or if I'm selling items either to our viewers on our Discord, linked down in the video description below, or if I'm selling them on eBay, then I have to print labels. I don't need a fancy computer, but a Ryzen 5 2400G certainly fits the bill. And for about 2, maybe 2.5 years, it sat there doing its job just fine. Then I made some changes to the computer. I was initially doing a little bit more with it. We were setting up a filming area near where the front door to our office is, and I thought, okay, I'll put some more stuff on it. I'll stick some extra storage on it because the SSD in there, even 480, wasn't enough. This Western Digital MyBook hard drive was actually attached to this computer for about a year, and then I upgraded the CPU and dropped a video card in, partly because I was tired of using a Zen 1 chip, and partly because I wanted a video card. So this Ryzen 7 3700X got put in here. Yes, this is a Zen 2 CPU. Yes, that is a B350 motherboard. And with an updated BIOS, yes, it worked just fine. It wasn't very responsive, mostly because the budget SATA SSD that was in there was, shall we say, not very good, and it couldn't turbo quite as high because of the budget components as a high-end build, but it really did work just fine. It didn't have any errors, didn't have any crashes, didn't have any blue screens. The 3700X worked just fine. I have had 3 or 4 different video cards in here, just whatever was available. It didn't really matter. I dropped different things in there. The most recent video card that was in here, for no reason whatsoever, was an RTX 3060 Ti, which is a bit silly for sort of this budget case, this budget power supply. Although I am happy to say that the 500 watt power supply had no issue running a 3060 Ti whatsoever. I have since taken that video card out, and I've put the Ryzen 5 3400G in here. I actually considered putting the Ryzen 7 5700G, which we recently covered in here, but that's a $250 plus CPU, and for email and printing shipping labels, that's kind of a waste, and the 3400G was just sitting on the shelf, so in it went. I am using an upgraded cooler. The original 2200G came with the Wraith Stealth Cooler, a very small, mini, lightweight cooler. Let's just say I have enough Wraith Spire coolers from all my other CPUs that I didn't really have to use that. So what you're looking at there is actually the cooler that came on the original Ryzen 7 1700. That is the Wraith Spire cooler. It is twice the height with a copper base plate, and it has RGB. You know, that makes it 5% faster, of course. So, and believe it or not, this motherboard actually has an RGB plug. So when this is plugged in and turned on, the RGB ring on that cooler does light up. Festive. The next change in this computer is I removed the 480 gigabyte SATA SSD that I originally put in this machine. I noted at the beginning of the video that the $400 budget was originally a 256 gig drive, which I showed in the video, but then if you watch the build video, which was part 3 of the series, I didn't because I had a need for more space testing games, etc. So this is actually the exact drive that spent the past 4.5 years in this computer, which I just removed a few hours before filming this video. There is now a Crucial P1 budget NVMe SSD in the M.2 slot in there. I used Macron Reflect Free to clone the SSD from the SATA drive to the NVMe. A few years ago, it was problematic in some circumstances, depending upon the motherboard and how it configured, to clone SATA SSDs to NVMe drives. I am pleased to report most of those issues have been worked out and it cloned over just fine. Booted up the first try, no issue whatsoever. If you need to upgrade your SSD, Macron Reflect Free really has gotten so much easier than it used to be. It's a few clicks, so long as you vaguely understand what you're looking at and the partitions and how to pick which drive you're using. If you can do that, then you can use it and you can clone from one drive to another, small to big, etc. I am pleased to report that even though the Crucial P1 is a relatively budget NVMe SSD, it's not a 970 EVO or anything from Samsung, it is noticeably more responsive than this SATA drive is. Chrome tabs open faster, the machine boots a little bit faster. The overall feel of the computer did improve. So if you're using a computer with a 4-year-old cheap budget SSD, you might be surprised. Get yourself a modern NVMe SSD, clone Windows over to it. I did not do a clean install. This is a fairly old install of Windows on it at this point. You might find your machine has a new lease on life. 2 more items worth mentioning on what we've done to this computer. The first is actually really quick. We replaced this back fan. 120 millimeter fan. It originally came with the case. It was fine for a couple of years. It developed a rattle. It got noisy. I suspect this happens with a lot of people's computers. You get a funny rattle, you get a funny noise, it's frustrating, it's annoying. A $10 fan can often fix that right up. It takes 3 or 4 minutes to replace 4 screws in the back, comes out, unplug it from the motherboard, put it back, put the new one in, screw it in, problem solved. The other one that we need to talk about is system memory. And those of you who know me well might laugh when you hear what I have to say. Well, you won't laugh at the first part. You might laugh at the second part. This computer was originally spec'd with 8 gigabytes of RAM. It was tested with 8 gigabytes of RAM for a hot minute if you look at the benchmarks from back then. But if I'm being completely honest, in terms of a personal use machine or even a business machine, I haven't had a computer with 8 gigabytes of RAM in a very, very long time. I don't like being short of system memory. I know what it does when you open one too many Chrome tabs. Maybe that's Google's fault. We should make Google pay for all of our RAM. When you open one too many Chrome tabs, and the system slows down. So I upgraded to 16 gigs of RAM, and it had 16 gigs for quite some time. And then a funny thing happened. RAM got cheaper, and I decided to upgrade the RAM in my computer at home. Those of you who follow our live streams might have remembered this from a couple of years ago. 64 gigabytes of DDR4 3200 dropped to just $165 a year and a half ago, give or take. And that was just too good of a deal to pass up. It's actually back to that at this point, but it was a special sale at the time. So I bought 64 gigabytes of RAM. I put that in my personal gaming computer at home, which had 32 gigs. I took that 32 gigs out and I put it in here for an upgrade. Complete side note, where did the 3700X come from that went into here? that was actually in my oldest son's computer. He had a Ryzen 7 3700X at home. There is actually a video showing that on the channel as well. And I figured he could probably use an upgrade because I wanted an upgrade because we had a Ryzen 9 3900X. So I took that CPU, the 3900X, and I put it in my son's machine. I took that 3700X and I put it in this machine. That is not something the typical person can do. You either have a computer company, or you are a tech YouTuber, or you have some other reason to have a variety of parts constantly cycling through your life. Before I had a YouTube channel, it was not nearly this common. And so you can do that kind of thing where you pass down the part. Complete side note, that's also why Ryzen is awesome. And it is why a majority of my computers are AM4 Ryzen-based systems. Some of you think I like Intel, some of you think I like the deal, and some of you think I like AMD. The truth of the answer is I like good deals. And one of the true advantages of the AM4 platform is the fact that this computer has had a Ryzen 3 2200G, a Ryzen 5 2400G, a Ryzen 7 3700X, and now a Ryzen 5 3400G. And it could have, if I had wanted to, but I didn't want to waste the money and lock up the chip and then have to take it out next time I want to test it, it could have had a Ryzen 7 5700G in here if I'd wanted to put it in there. Intel doesn't do that. So 2 gold stars to AMD for being awesome with the vast array of support on the AM4 platform. Circling back to the system memory, which I didn't finish that story, this had 32 gigabytes of system RAM simply due to the fact that I can pass down the part from machine to machine. However, when I took the 3700X out and put the 3400G in, I realized I don't really need 32 gigabytes of RAM in this system. This prints shipping labels, it accesses email, I don't play games on it, there's not multiple monitors plugged into it, I don't have 452 Chrome tabs open. Most of that RAM was kind of unnecessary, and there's better machines to put it into. So I took the 32 gigabytes out and actually downgraded to 16, which, truth be told, for what this does, is absolutely just fine. That brings us to what should you do with this 2018 build in 2022? Well, if you don't want to build an entirely new computer using a new case, new motherboard, etc., which is certainly an option, if you build a new computer, you have the benefit of 2 computers when you're done, your original plus the new one. But if you do want to upgrade this, I'd like to point out that thanks to AMD's exceptional support of the 300 series motherboards, you have a really interesting budget option. If you have a video card, this CPU right here, the Ryzen 5 5500, not the 5600, not the 5600X, the 5500. It has a few minor limitations over the 5600X. Nothing this computer is going to care about. PCI Express Gen 3, stuff like that, which doesn't work on this motherboard anyway. 6 cores, 12 threads, Zen 3. Comes with a cooler in the box. If you need a new cooler, if your old cooler's not in good condition, it does come with a cooler in the box, which is pretty cool. $120 as of the time of filming this video. Only $20 more than the original Ryzen 3 2200G, and instead of Zen 1 cores, you have Zen 3 cores. No integrated graphics, which is the only real downside. If that had integrated graphics, holy smokes, we'd be having a different conversation. Then in terms of video card, the best bang for the buck right now is absolutely the AMD Radeon RX 6600. About $250 at the time of filming, 8 gigabytes of GDDR6 VRAM. This isn't just an amazing 1080p graphics card, it's a respectable 1440p card as well, depending upon the games. Not Cyberpunk, but a lot of other games that'll run at 1440p just fine. And it'll run everything, including Cyberpunk, at 1080p, absolutely without an issue, over 60 frames a second, sometimes way over, I love this card, it's amazing. This card is between 30 to 50% more performance than, say, GTX 1070 or 1070 Ti and several older cards from the past few years. So while you can buy less expensive cards, you can go onto eBay right now and buy a GTX 1070 for about $150, and it's perfectly fine to drop one of those in here. But this is faster, and it is newer, and it will have better driver support. And then you get an all AMD machine, which is kind of cool as well. The other thing I would do is replace the SSD. I already talked about this, so I won't bury it in detail. but a 1 terabyte NVMe SSD is under $60 right now, and it will absolutely demolish whatever SSD that you bought for a budget machine back in 2018. Windows will launch faster. Chrome will open faster. Games will update faster. Just everything will just run much more responsively. And especially if you put a Zen 3 CPU on an old board with an old SATA drive, you may very well hamper or bottleneck your great Zen 3 chip with an old budget SATA drive. Put a nice NVMe drive in there, use Macro Reflect to clone it over, takes 20, maybe 30 minutes depending upon the speed and size of your old drive, and Bob's your uncle, you're off to the races. With these three upgrades, you're looking at about $400, which is what the machine originally cost, but you don't have to build a new machine, and you can drop these three components in and potentially get several more years of life out of what was originally a budget computer. Having said that, if you do still have 8 gigabytes of RAM in here, that needs to be upgraded as well. Ideally 32, it's about $80 or $85, but 16 is also a reasonable option. And 16 gigabytes of RAM is about $45 right now, so if you're still on 8, 16 is really where you should be. I want to conclude this video with some thoughts on how awesome AM4 is for upgrading and downgrading. Yes, I alluded to that earlier. I have a few more things to say. And then I want to talk about another budget build that I did back in 2018 based upon the Intel Pentium G5400. It was a little bit less expensive than this for a couple of reasons, closer to $300. I did several benchmark videos. You will find those down below as well, where I compared this to the Pentium G5400, both with the integrated graphics here, and then I put a GT 1030 into both machines to see if you were doing an ultra budget upgrade with a, at the time, $79 video card, what could you accomplish in gaming? Spoiler alert, they were actually both pretty close. This was a little bit faster in some cases. The Pentium G5400 was a little bit faster than others, but they were both functional for the kinds of games that they were intended to play. However, I still have this machine. I don't have the Pentium G5400. I sold that computer. That had an H310 motherboard. Now, it is technically true that the 2-core, 4-thread Pentium CPU could have been upgraded all the way to an i9 9900K, 8-core, 16-thread, 4.7 gigahertz CPU. But A, it wouldn't run at 4.7 gigahertz on all the cores because the VRMs on that H310 motherboard would never have handled it. And B, the cooling in that case would never have handled the cooling of a hot-running CPU like that. My own 9900K at home, for example, has a massive Noctua NHD15 on it. Wrong case, wrong power supply, wrong cooling. So technically it's upgradable, but not really. Furthermore, there's nothing further you can go to beyond 8th or 9th generation on the 300 series motherboards, because when 10th generation and 11th generation came out, you had to have a 400 series or 500 series motherboard. Alder Lake is now launched, which is a 600 series board. Raptor Lake's about to launch, which will work on 600 and 700 series. And then next year, in 2023, we're supposed to be getting Meteor Lake, which will be on 800 series and a whole new socket and completely incompatible. So in the time since AM4 came out, Intel has been on 200 series, 300 series, not compatible with 200 series, 400 and 500 series, not compatible with 300 or 200 series, 600 series, not compatible with 500, 400, 300, or 200, and next year we may be getting 800 series, which isn't compatible with any of them. I do see your comments. I do understand why people are a fan of the AM4 platform, because you have the option to take a $400 2018 budget build that had a $99 4-core, 4-thread budget APU and put a Ryzen 7 3700X in it and have it work just fine. Now, would I put a Ryzen 9 5950X in this? No. For the same reasons I wouldn't put an i9 9900K on the H310 motherboard. There's not sufficient cooling in this case. There's not sufficient airflow. The voltage regulators, the power delivery on this motherboard would never handle a Ryzen 9 5950X. It would power or thermal throttle. It would be a really bad idea. However, how many of you realistically are taking this case, this motherboard, and this build and saying, yeah, I want to put a 16-core chip on it? I don't think so. However, if this isn't your cup of tea, do consider that Ryzen 7 3700X CPUs right now are about $120 on eBay, or about the same price as this. Very similar overall multi-core performance, but the Zen 3 chip is faster on a per-core basis. Take your pick depending on whether or not you think one is better than the other. But I had a 3700X in here. I had it on that cooler, the Wraith Spire stock cooler, not some fancy exotic cooler, not a liquid cooler. Now, I didn't do Blender renders, I didn't do video encoding on it, I didn't have some huge massive workload on it, but I didn't have any issues running a 3700X on this whatsoever, which you can't say for Intel. So I think AMD deserves 2 more gold stars for this amazing platform. I only hope that the upcoming launch of AM5 turns out to be the same way. AMD has only promised 3 years of support on AM5 versus the 4 years, actually it turned out to be 4+ years on AM4. But they did say 2025 plus, so it could still be 4 years of support. We will see. But if they do that again, I think they will earn themselves a lot of fans. I will be one of them, because you'll be able to build a Zen 4 system using an AM5 motherboard on day 1, and 4 years later, upgrade it massively to whatever is the then new CPU.
URCity Keys is the best source for genuine Windows and Office Professional product keys that work the first time, every time. Get 25% off their already amazing prices using our code TD20 and the link in the video description below. $15 gets you a Windows Professional OEM key that is a real product key and activates directly with Microsoft. Or get a full copy of Office 2019 Professional Plus for $50 that redeems at setup.office.com using your Microsoft account. Or why not both? And the nice thing, use them forever as they link directly to your Microsoft account and work through reinstalls. We have been using URCity Keys for over 3 years now and highly recommend them.
Thank you all so much for watching this video to the very end. 2 gold stars for all of you. Like this video if you like it. Share it with your friends if you love it. Remember to subscribe to the channel with the big huge red button directly below. Questions, comments, thoughts, feedback, suggestions. There is a comment section below. Please use it. Let me know. Did you build something like this? Do you have a computer like this? Have you upgraded an AM4 based system? Have you taken advantage of this? Are you on Intel? I'm curious, what kind of system do you all have, and are you looking forward to upgrading it, or are you going to build a completely new machine? There will also be links down in the video description below to Amazon, Newegg, and eBay. Those are affiliate links. They support the channel at no extra cost to you, and if you like this content and you want to see more of it, please use those links when shopping, even if it's a jar of peanut butter. The 5500 will be linked down there. Used 3700Xs to eBay will be linked. The RX 6600, which truly is an amazing graphics card for the money, amazing performance, especially given the past 2 years of GPU availability due to the situation that we will not mention. This is a breath of fresh air, and it was actually quite a pleasure to use and to test. And unlike the 5000 series, which had a few driver issues when RDNA came out, I gotta say, we didn't have any problems. Not a single game problem. Nothing crashed, nothing failed. Nothing weird happened with the 6000 series. We've been very, very happy with it, so I'm happy to recommend it, and it will work just fine in a system like this. Thank you all so very much for watching. I will see all of you next time.